they were not part, they had their own thing going, but it wasn't, it was the Carters, but they weren't really country either. They were traditional in a lot of ways. So I don't know what the delineation would be between who came and who didn't. The traditional singers like Earl Stanley and the Staples singers, people who were really doing traditional things rather than new country.
At Newport, Johnny met a young singer named Bob Dylan. They admired one another, and a friendship developed between the young folk singer and the veteran of country music. Cash recorded several Dylan songs for his album Orange Blossom Special, including Don't Think Twice and Mama, You've Been on My Mind. Dylan and Cash later recorded together on Dylan's Nashville Skyline. By the late 60s, Johnny Cash was an internationally acclaimed superstar. He had achieved much in his decade-plus career. He had hits on all the charts, country, folk, and pop, and he had appeared in movies, on TV, and on stages around the world. And in 1968, he released one of his most popular recordings, At Folsom Prison, which included 2 songs written by old friend Jack Clement.
Flush from the Bathroom of Your Heart, and Dirty Old Eggs Hugging Dog, a couple of my biggest money makers. Johnny Cash, I wrote them all by myself, and I published them at the time. And Johnny Cash cut both of them in his Folsom Prison album, which must have sold at least 10 million. So I made a lot of money out of them 2 silly little songs. People used to ask me why I write stuff like that. I said, well, why not? I just write what I'm in the mood for at the time. That's the whole thing about writing. You don't have to think about it. Just do it.
The Prisoners roared for Folsom Prison Blues and I Walk the Line, but it was A Boy Named Sue, penned by Shel Silverstein, that brought down the big house. In A Boy Named Sue, a father gives his son a girl's name so that he will get used to fighting and scrapping to get by. It was something they could all identify with.
The story behind Boy Named Sue. Do you know that he had heard the song like 3 days before he went into prison and doing the live album? It was recorded live. He had learned that song. Literally, he had actually the words to that song, and he sang it for the first time in public on that live album.
However, Johnny again faced controversy this time, dealing with the line in Folsom Prison Blues, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die.
Cash had this record out, Folsom Prison Blues, when Bobby Kennedy got shot. So Clive calls me up and says, Tom, you're tight with Cash. Call him up and see if you can get him to okay the editing of that single. I said, okay. And so I said, it's going to be tough, but okay. So I called him. I didn't get him. I took the records home with me. Meanwhile, Bob Johnson was in Nashville, and Bob had instructions to edit the single. So he edited the single, okay, you know. And so he called me up, and I said, Bob, ship it to Pittman, to our pressing plant in New Jersey to ship the singles out. We had to reservice the record. But meanwhile, I had to get Cash's approval. So I spoke to Cash from home with my wife being the DJ. We DJ'd this record up, and we did it for, I was on the phone for over an hour with Cash, pleading with him to let us edit this record. And he said, no, don't touch my record, don't touch. I said, Johnny, they're gonna step on your record anyway. They're gonna step on the front, step on the, you won't recognize your record. And he said, no. He said, no. He kept saying no. Finally, after an hour of convincing him, he finally said, all right, on one condition, Tom. I said, what's that? You do the edit yourself. I said, you got a deal, John. I'll do it, okay? Hung up and I called Nashville Shipping, man. But we took that line out. There was a line in that song that said, I shot a man just to watch him die. And when he said that in the song, the convicts cheered. And that, I said, Johnny, if you listen to that record, what do you think Mrs. Kennedy's going to feel when she hears that line, okay? You know, so, and you know she's going to hear it, you know, so I finally convinced him to get the song. But so if you listen to it today, it's still out of the single, but it's in the album.
The record was a smash, and Johnny was on top of the musical world. But things weren't as they seemed. At the time of his greatest success, his wife Vivian was filing for divorce, and Cash was about to hit bottom in his battle against drug abuse.
He was very high on booze and pills, okay, you know, but he used to call me it seemed like every day. It wasn't every day, but it just seemed that way. But you had to talk to Johnny Cash as John Cash about Johnny's records. So it was a dual personality there, and I had to turn and say, John, how you doing, John? I'm doing great. How's Johnny's records doing? As well, they're doing very well, and that, and you tell him, and so he was right. But then he'd hang up his friends and everything. But the thing is, he also, before he hung up, every day when he'd call me, he'd ask, how's Johnny Horton's records doing? Johnny Horton was dead by that time, because he really believed that he talked to him every night. I said, tell Horton his records at Battle of New Orleans is like a total smash, man. It's incredible.
Friends arranged for a doctor to wean him off drugs, and he began going regularly to church in Hendersonville, Tennessee, where he had purchased a home. Attending First Baptist Church with Johnny was June Carter. The rumors of romance between June Carter and Johnny Cash that had floated around for years were not rumors. Although they had both been married, the two began a clandestine relationship shortly after June and the Carter family appeared with Johnny for the first time. They were careful to keep up appearances, but with the dissolution of both their marriages, they were finally able to openly declare their love. It was June who was the catalyst for Johnny's rehabilitation, and in February of '68, Johnny proposed to her on stage during a concert in Ontario, Canada. They were married within a month, and Johnny and June settled into a long, happy, and productive marriage. They performed together and made many memorable recordings. A son, John Carter Cash, was born in 1970. The man from Dyess, Arkansas, had come a very long way from picking cotton. Drug-free and in improved health, Cash embarked on some of the most prolific years of his career.
I met Johnny Cash only briefly. I met him, I believe, in '69 when I was working for Columbia Records. But the best thing about Johnny Cash was I actually got to see him, I think the year before, I think '68. And it was one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. Brilliantly paced. The Statler brothers and Marty Robbins opened for him. And Marty was, a legend also. And Marty would do his set, and then the Statlers would do a few numbers. Then they'd break for intermission. Then the Carter family would come out and kept building up. Well, Johnny will be out soon. Johnny will be out soon. And it was like, it's almost like you're waiting for Christ to come. And then Johnny does come out, and it's like, and does a set like you can't believe.
In the span of the '70s, he released 25 albums, and the Nashville Banner reported that Cash even outsold the Beatles for a time. He was featured on the cover of Life and Time magazines, toured in Japan and Europe, sold out the Hollywood Bowl, and even co-starred with Kirk Douglas in the film A Gunfight. Often seen on TV, he appeared on The Muppet Show, hosted Saturday Night Live, and guest starred on Columbo with Peter Falk.
He was not a bad actor either. He did a famous episode of Columbo where he and Peter Falk are together, and it's a hoot to watch the two of them together. You get the feeling they had a good time working together.
His own series, The Johnny Cash Show, featured Johnny with musical guests from a broad range of musical styles. His very first guest was his old friend, Bob Dylan.
I have one of those TV shows on a DVD that's got the first TV appearance with James Taylor, and he'd done it in some college somewhere. And Cash's students are asking about the dangers of smoking marijuana, and Cash is saying, well, I'm not going to tell you I never did it. Probably not good for you, but let's go on to the music.
Johnny Cash had Johnny Cash Show, and he introduced Christopherson to the world on his show, as he did James Taylor. And because Johnny Cash, now there's an artist who's talk about complex and multi-talent and what have you, but he saw the insight, the greatness in Christopherson's writing. Well, when he first did Sunday Morning Coming Down on the program, on the TV show, when he first rehearsed, did it in rehearsal, there's a line in there, on a Sunday morning sidewalk, feeling, Lord, that I was stoned. They didn't want him to say stoned. And what was it? Feeling, Lord, like I was home. And he said, it doesn't make any sense. Why? And he said, look, if I can't sing the song the way it was written, I respect the writer. And Chris himself even said this in an interview about John, how Cash stood by. He says, you know, these were the bigwigs telling him how he had to do that song because they didn't want any flack. You don't say stoned on network television. Well, he did. He sang. He said, I can't sing that song, and I'm going to sing that song the way it's written, or I'm going to quit. Literally, he put his job on the line for Chris because he felt that song was important, and also he wanted to sing it the way Chris wrote it. And that shows you the measure of the man of Johnny Cash.
Always a very religious man, he produced and financed the movie Gospel Road, filmed entirely in Israel in 1973. The movie retraces the footsteps of Christ and relates the gospel in song and spoken word.
Hofstra had a special screening. They advertised it in the paper. Screening of Gospel Road. $10. I went out, Shirley and I both went to see it. We saw the movie. Then he comes out. Everybody, Carter family, and they did a 40-minute concert. Unannounced. This was not part of the... just unreal. I mean, you got to see a great movie, and then you get to see his show. It just was, again, another aspect of what he was all about.
Two future country stars, Chris Christopherson and Larry Gatlin, co-wrote the music with Johnny, and the film premiered in Nashville.
And I remember when that came in, that album. I mean, it was like, and it had Christopherson songs on it. Why Me? Help Me by Larry Gatlin. Statler Brothers are on there. And he went there and actually literally recorded the sounds at the wall in Jerusalem. He went and visited, and it was recorded live. These are the rules that John lived by. And when he said something to you, you believed it.
Through his renewed faith, he and June became lifelong friends with the Reverend Billy Graham and his wife Ruth, and appeared on stage with Graham's Christian Crusade. Johnny even became an ordained Christian minister in 1977.
He sent me a tape of him reading the Bible. He read the Bible for one of the religious companies here in town. It was very impressive. Great voice for it, but what kind of amazed me was that he didn't get into overkill in it. I was expecting him to be thunderous, but he wasn't. He was very reverent in his reading of it, because you would have thought